I've come to learn this simple yet very hard truth, that in order for a wound to heal, it must first be exposed. Hey, this is Jeff with Hope again. I hope you were able to watch last Sunday's video where I talked about what happens when hope dies. Those dark, dark times when your situation seems hopeless. The reality is, when hope dies in your life, it marks you. Let's use this illustration just for a second. When hope dies, it's kind of like it leaves a wound, some bigger than others. Now, let's talk about wounds for a second. I've never seriously been injured, but I have shot a 16 penny, 3.5 inch nail through my finger with a pneumatic nailer. I did slice my finger open one time because, like an idiot, I was cutting a piece of brisket on my hand. I mean, it was on a napkin, but the knife was so sharp it went through the brisket, through the napkin, into my skin, nearly to the bone. That one required stitches. One time I was riding my four-wheeler out in the woods in a trail, and I got the idea I would stiff arm this branch, but it slipped off and slit my lip wide open. That one too required stitches. But I think the injury that best serves as an example for this is me fishing at the river. I went there all the time with my buddies. It was way out. It's about 30 minutes out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 minutes from a main road, about an hour from civilization. We waited, and the rocks were slippery when you fish. Slipping was part of everyday life there. One time I slipped and I cut my knee really bad, about a 4-inch gouge on my left knee. When I finally got to the hospital, it was nasty. I had walked up the river, through the woods to my truck and drove, like I said, an hour or so to get there. Guess what they had to do? They said they had to open it up further, that if I really wanted that wound to properly heal, they had to expose it in order to clean it. That was not fun at all. Now, I'll shift this illustration for a second. Let's say we're not talking about external bloody knees. We're talking about internal wounds. Those things in your life that cut deep. You know what I'm talking about. Now, there's two main types of wounds. There's things that happen to you, where you get hurt. There's also wounds that you might have inflicted upon someone else that they're hurt because of you. Either way, both are very painful. Either you got hurt or someone else got hurt. I'm sure you can relate to that as well. And also, there's two different ways to deal with a wound. You deal with it voluntarily, you go to the ER, you sit there, you open your knee, you let them do it, or involuntary. But either way, I've come to learn this simple yet very hard truth, that in order for a wound to heal, it must first be exposed. Now, this begins to make sense because last time I started telling you my story, and it was painful, it was hard for me to do. I was trying to be real and authentic, not gloss over anything. Mine was in fact a self-inflicted wound caused by my own decisions. It was so powerful that it didn't just wound me, it wounded everyone else around me. You see, that's how our choices work. Very seldom do your choices only affect you. They have a tendency to ripple out and can cause a tidal wave of destruction to others in your life. Truth is, I had things in my life that needed to be healed. Maybe more than healed. More specifically, I had areas in my life that were hidden, weaknesses that I was just ashamed of. I'm sure some of you can relate to that as well. And let's face it, it's hard to come clean, to be vulnerable about our junk. I mean, for me, I was a pastor. It was very challenging to be authentic about your weaknesses, but it's extremely important. As I said, you can only start to heal when things are exposed. Again, in my story, it was involuntary exposure, to be sure. Let me tell you, as painful as it was to go to the ER and willingly sit there and allow them to open my knee up and scrub it clean, that pain pales in comparison to the pain that I felt when I refused to expose my own heart and issues, but was forced to be exposed. I can say it now. Now, I'm glad I did. I'm not necessarily glad with everything that happened or how it was handled and things like that. It was very painful. But see, your thing may not be sin. It may not be something like that. But if you want whatever it is, you feel like your hope has died, you want it to come back to life, you have to get to a place where you can expose it, to talk about it, to open up and let that cleaning process begin. So let's make it personal. What's your wound? What are you dealing with? Is it an addiction? Is it disappointment or depression? Is it the way you feel about your spouse, or maybe bitterness that you have towards someone who's hurt you? You just can't seem to let it go. Are you still dealing with a major loss, a death? All kinds of things, failures, setbacks, whatever it may be. Whatever it is, maybe it's time to bring it out into the light. Talk about it. Write about it. Of course, pray about it. Expose it voluntarily before you're forced, sometimes with the devastating reality of public exposure. I want to talk to you about one of my favorite guys in the Bible, David. You know, the guy that killed the giant with the slingshot? It's in Psalm 57. You can read all around that. But David went from a giant killing machine as a young man to being named the king of Israel. But he also had some enemies. You could say there were some people that were less than supportive. Things had gotten so bad for David, he had to run for his life. He's just chased out. He had to go, and at one of his darkest moments, David found himself hiding in a cave. Imagine that. He's named king, hiding in a cave from people that wanted to do him harm. He describes these people in vivid detail. He said they had teeth that pierced like arrows. They had, I think, words that cut like swords, that they were set on fire with hatred, that they had set nets out to snare him, that they had already dug a pit for him. That was his words in the scripture, Psalm 57. It's a pretty dark, I think you could agree for this illustration, this teaching, that was a pretty dark moment where David's hope had died. What's your situation like? Maybe it's not people chasing you down, but maybe you have been betrayed. Maybe you've got this crushing uncertainty of what the future holds, health-wise, what's happening around the globe, financially, relationally, professionally. Maybe it's worrying about your kids or your aging parents, or maybe someone dealing with suicidal thoughts. Maybe the weight of depression for you right now is so real that you feel like you're physically being crushed and struggling to survive. And you find yourself, hiding in a cave. I don't know what your cave is, but listen to me. You do. You know every crack and crevice of it, don't you? You know how it feels, what it sounds like, what it smells like, because it's your reality. It's what you are dealing with. People can sympathize, but it's your deal. That's what it feels like when you lose hope, is you're stuck in a cave somewhere. It's a very dark and lonely place, for sure. I get it. I know. I've been there. In this story, David spends a good bit of time in the dark, in this cave, alone, crying, wallowing around in misery. But then his prayerful cries, which are good, by the way, prayerful cries, they change. Psalm 57:8, he says, "Awaken my soul with the music of his splendor. Arise, my soul, and sing." That's simply saying, hey, I'm going to wake up and crank up the music. And he says 5 words, "I will awaken the dawn." From this place of darkness, he cried out to God, "I will awaken the dawn." He's saying, I will worship you until the light comes. I don't care how dark things appear. I don't care how cold and dead things feel in my life. You get it? I don't care if I have enemies trying to track me down. My hope is awakening, like the dawn. Dawn is the first appearance of light at the beginning of a brand new day. You ever heard that statement, there's a light at the end of the tunnel? I think we may spend too much time looking for and chasing after that what if and if only light at the end of the tunnel. This scripture was a challenge to me, and it is to you as well. David commanded his heart to wake up. He yells at the darkness in that cave and says, "I will awaken the dawn." I remember when my hope began to awaken in my darkest time. I can honestly say, though, I was never mad at God. I was mad at myself. I was so mad, in fact, it took me years to forgive myself. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you are mad at God. Maybe you even blame God. I want you to hear me today. That's okay. Guess what? God's big enough to handle it. He's not going to get offended and run away. That's not going to stop him from pursuing you. And when I finally got a hold of that again through this thick, hardened skull and hardened heart, the fact that God just kept coming after me. He just kept chasing after me. All of a sudden, guess what? I finally got sick of the cave. I finally had enough. And like David, I commanded my heart to wake up. It's time for a new day. You start saying things like this. I choose to hold on to hope. I choose to turn my attention from the source of my pain to the source of eternal hope. Something bigger. See, when you can stop staring at your pain, when you can stop and pause long enough to look up, you just looking towards God has the power to awaken hope right in the middle of your cave, that darkest moment. So when you've lost hope, when it feels like that hope has died, just remember this. I got some good news for you today as I'm going to wrap this thing up. Maybe hope is not actually dead. Maybe your hope is just sleeping, and it needs to be awakened. Next time I want to talk to you about what happens when hope begins to rise. When it begins to rise like a freshly tapped well with fresh water rushing to the surface. That's next time. But in the meantime, remember this: there's always hope if you'll just dare to hope again. God bless you. See you next time. Bye.